Good Wednesday morning, Market Chameleons and everyone joining us for the first time. Thanks for coming by and checking out the Market Chameleon pre-market show with this man, Mitri Pargamonic. How you doing, D?
Good morning, Will. How are you?
Great. You want to start with a disclaimer?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, keep in mind, Will and I and Market Chameleon, we're not a registered investment advisor. We're not a broker dealer. We're not telling you what to do. We're just sharing ideas. If you need advice, call your registered investment advisor, call your broker. That's what they're there for. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. As I'm doing it, a quick note to anyone joining us for the first time. Will and I, we do these shows in the morning to try to help answer questions you may have about the Market Chameleon tools, the data, the analytics. If you have a question, you could type it into the live chat on YouTube. Will's watching it. He'll read them back to me. If you want to come on a show and ask your question live, we also provide a link to Zoom. Click on that link. Once you log into Zoom, click that button, raise your hand. That lets us know you have a question that you'd like to ask us. Once we let you in, you could ask it live and direct. To take a couple minutes and give you guys a chance to type in the questions, and for more people to join us, we'll start out taking a look at the pre-market report, see if we could get insights on what's trading in pre-market hours, and then we'll move on to the questions. All right, so pre-market report. These are stocks trading in the pre-market hours. I'm going to come down here. We're going to take a look at the three lists. We have our most actives, our biggest percentage gainers, biggest percentage decliners. I see 63 stocks made our percentage gainers list, 28 on our decliners. And from this perspective, looks like the trading activity in a pre-market is lining up with more bullish sentiment. Let's do another check. I'm going to come up here. This is a calendar view, and if you click on it, you could go back days to see what happened in a pre-market hours that day. Right now we're on October 11th. So from the high level, we got 521 stocks trading higher, 191 stocks trading lower in a pre-market. As far as volume goes, we got 172 million shares trading on up volume versus 40.8 million on down volume. And if we convert that volume to dollar value, we have $3.4 billion worth of stock trading higher versus $673 million worth of stock trading lower. So that also indicates to us that that the trading in the pre-market hours is leaning heavily towards the bullish side. Let's do one more check from a different perspective, and then we'll move on to the questions. So I'm going to come down here. When we looked at this report, we noticed there are small cap stocks in there. So these are symbols, price changes, market cap. You see a lot of small cap stocks, ETFs, leverage products, pretty much any security listed on a major U.S. exchange. If it's trading in pre-market hours and it's meeting our thresholds, it can make this list. And to narrow it down to a smaller group, we could use the filters above. So here, if you have a watch list, you could filter this whole list by your watch list. I'm going to use this one in ETF. As an example, we're going to click on it. You get a drop-down menu. You got different ETFs to select from. Top ones are broad-based ETFs. The bottom ones are sector ETFs. So if we click on SPY like this, that's the S&P 500 ETF. The list below gets filtered by stocks that are holdings in the SPY ETF, which are the S&P 500 constituents. Here, 9 stocks made our percentage gainers list, 6 on the decliners. Keep in mind, these have to meet certain thresholds with volume, price change, liquidity in the market, in the pre-market. But it looks here also that the lean is more towards the bullish side in the pre-market. So I do think that there's a wholesale inflation, maybe. Let me just look real quick today. An economic calendar. So today here we got we had an FOMC speaker talk actually pretty early in the morning. I think that the markets are reacting to some of the speakers where they're starting to tone down a little bit about raising interest rates again this year. But we do have, I think that another one though was the wholesale prices, I believe, came out today and looked like they're still moving higher. So I don't know, some mixed signals there. But I think that's some of the reaction is that that we may not have to raise interest rates anymore on the short end. So if you have questions, I'll take them now.
No questions have popped up, D.
Okay. Let's talk about then. Let me see. So yesterday we started talking about this price action analysis tool. And this tool here tries to analyze the intraday action, right? So a lot of times we look at like just in aggregate, like what a chart or what happened to total volume, but this breaks down the intraday data and puts it into buckets to kind of try to understand what's going on different hours of the day, different sessions of the day. We look at the volumes, we look at the price action, and try to figure out, from parsing the trades, a clearer picture of what's going on. And to do that, we would have to what we call is like categorize, classify the data into buckets to analyze it. And yesterday we talked about the different sessions. So right now we're in a pre-market session, right? So this is where we are right now. This is in SPY, the VWAP price. So that's the volume weighted average price that SPY traded so far in the pre-market hours. We have the total dollar value of all the trades. So we see $676 million worth of stock traded. Well, how's that compared to usual? Well, this is our relative volume. So it's about 90% of the daily average. So here are the daily averages in pre-market hours. So in the last 30 days, you could see the average daily volume was 713 million. And if we compared it to the previous 30 days, which was 550 million, you could see that there's a big uptick in the trading interest in SPY in the pre-market, right? So if we compared it to 30 days ago, versus the previous 30 days, the last 30 days versus the previous 30 days, we see that trading session out of all of them, you can see there's an opening cross, regular hours. That trading session so far had a big uptick, a lot more interest all of a sudden, trading interest in pre-market activity. Which usually is reacting to some kind of a news event in the morning. So it's much more sensitive to these news events in the morning, with speakers or interest rates or whatever it is. So that's notable, a big uptick in the pre-market trading in SPY. The opening cross we talked about yesterday, that's down 9%. And here's regular hours. So regular hours, so that's after the open, then from 9:30 to 4, it's considered regular trading hours. Here we see that there's an uptick of 8% versus in the last 30 days versus the previous 30, right? So these are looking at a 30-day daily average. And one of the things that we talked about is why we could bucket the regular trading hours and keep slicing and dicing it, right? So we could keep taking that data, putting them into more and more buckets to analyze. All right, so here, let's go to the regular session. So how can we analyze this? Well, within the regular trading hours, we notice that there are different volume profiles from day to day. So we see that in the first hour of trading, right, we got $5.6 billion worth of stock traded in SPY. Then the middle of the day, we got 14.8 billion. So this excludes the first and last hour. So everything in between the first and last hour. Then we got the last hour of trading, set on average 7.3 billion. We talked about the last 2 minutes of volume, and you could see here that there's $1.4 billion worth of stock that transacts in just the last 2 minutes. And that's important because you'll see a big uptick in the last 2 minutes, and it could be due to portfolio rebalancing, hedging, anticipating the closing price, but there's definitely a big uptick in those last 2 minutes. We'll take a look at that. We also talked about the closing cross, which is important because that closing price, as you guys recall, if you guys watched yesterday, that there are specific strategies, specific security types that need to trade on exactly the closing price. Okay, they can't get they can get a little bit above, they can get a little bit below. It needs to be exactly the closing price because certain securities are created, redeemed, there are net asset values, they're calculated based on net asset value closing of closing prices. Certain things settle based on closing prices, so they need the exact closing price. And then we talked about the after hours. So let's take a look at let's take a look at these last 2 minutes. So I'm going to go here in the trading VWAP just to show you guys what that would look like. So this is yesterday's SPY. This is a breakdown summary by each minute. So within each minute, we see the volume, the number of trades, the VWAP price, the change from the previous minute. How much did the VWAP move from 1 minute to the next, right? We have the high-low range, so we could see what range did that minute trade. So we can measure, the high and low range within a minute, and we could compare those minute to minute. We could see the bid ask, so we could see if the spread between the bid and offer is changing throughout the day. So there's a lot of stuff in here that once we start bucketing into it and categorizing it, could start analyzing. And then, of course, we have, we could categorize how many of those were sweep orders, how many of them were block trades, how much traded in a dark pool, how many were institutions. These are all based on what happened within that minute. So just to give you guys an idea here is if we took wait a minute. Let me see why this is not. No, it's not calculating for the previous day. All right, so if we look at any given minute, just up here, we could see the last, from 3:41 to 4 o'clock, you could see how the volume, is going from about 200,000 shares traded you know, per minute. If we go back, it's probably like, you could see how, up to 200, it even goes below. So as we get closer to the close, right? So this is not including the closing auction. These are all during regular trading hours. We got closer yesterday. One thing we saw is that there was 5 minutes before we saw a volume burst. So you could see here almost 700,000 shares traded, which for within this time period is 2.6 standard deviations above the average where it trades usually around this time. You could see that was on an uptick, right? So if we measure from the previous minute, we see that's an uptick of 19 cents. So the assumption is that volume was more buy pressure than sell pressure, right? So we give it a buy burst to move the stocks higher, buyers to take the offers. And then here the last 2 minutes, and you see here, even before the close, this is 3:59. So this is prior to the closing cross, it jumps to 2.1 million. So just to give you a sense how the time of day, even, the time of day, it is traded much differently sometimes, right? So we don't see here, let's just see. You could see here 3:59. I sorted this by volume. So even with big volume bursts throughout the day, you could see that last 2 minutes, that would be typical. Let's do something like and I know this is because I know people have entire strategies around that. So here is Apple. So here's Apple. You could see here, starting 341, around 100,000. It's fluctuating here and there around 100,000, climbs up to 200,000. So as we get closer, it's starting to climb. We have that big volume burst on 354. And then right at 359, 723, which you see, we didn't calculate that as an unusual amount for that time of day, but you could see the difference, right? You could just see, you don't even need the math. If you're looking through this data, you could see the difference that those last 2 minutes trade much different, right? That's why we measure it to see, well, what's going on those 2 minutes? Are we seeing in general more interest, less interest, the same? And what can that could signify, right? Because what we know is that last minute, it's not like that a bunch of it's not like there's a ton of retail investors that are all skewed towards entering their order the last minute every single day, right? It's not retail orders aren't distributed that way, and a lot of VWAP orders are not really distributed that way unless they have to maybe clean something up. So maybe there's a cleanup there, but there are certain strategies that are have to get rebalanced, right? They rebalance it at the end of the day. You could think of like, when you're trading baskets or pairs, or you're hedging your options delta, and you need to leave neutral, or it could be people who are trying to anticipate that closing price and buying it right before the closing price to see if they could scalp it. But these are certain insights that we could section off, right, to analyze differently. So the idea here is, and you're going to see more tools that we're going to start to publish. So you're going to see more tools around here. But as an introduction, what I wanted to do is start kind of explaining that the intraday data, when we start to analyze it and section it off, you could gain a lot more insights, all right, than just the days, besides just like the days change in volume. So another one we went through yesterday was like an example was just a unusual buy burst or sell burst. All right, so here we had an Apple. We saw there are 2 unusual buy bursts and 3 unusual sell bursts. For the buy burst totaled, there are 2 separate ones, so we're looking at each minute. They totaled $73.6 million worth of stock for VWAP price of 179.12. And on average, those 2, the change in the tick from 1 minute to the next after was 5 cents. So a buy burst, and we could take a look at it here. There's 2 of them here. So if we click on it, let's say we click on, so you see down here, these are all the minutes going back. So if we click on this minute, it'll take us over here. This is the one that it's referencing. You could see here that a buy burst of 206,000 shares happened at 106. And for that time period, right, because we're putting them in buckets, for that time of day, that is a high volume burst. It's 2.8 standard deviations away from the average volume for that time of day. And we could see here that even though it went up by 3 cents. So it was a big volume burst. It looks like it came right after, some sell activity, and that could indicate to us that even though a large amount of volume entered, and it looks like, from the tick that it was more buy pressure than sell pressure, it wasn't that of a significant move. So there's probably some on the offer, right? So even though they thought that there's enough on the offer that it didn't make a big, as you could see here, look at those down moves before that. And this is what we could tell here, that these 2 bursts, the average move up was 5 cents. The burst down, there's 3 of them. The average move was 14 cents, meaning that it was less liquid to sell than to buy. All right, so trying to sell it, they had to, the prices moved down by a bigger amount than when the buy burst came in. So hopefully that makes sense to people, right? So we could also see even in that minute, well, we see the buy burst 206. We see a lot of it was sweep orders, so it was pretty aggressive, right? There was pretty aggressive orders in there, and that only 10% of it was a block trade. A lot of it had to get split up, meaning they're buying scooping offers across the board in the book. 27% of it only was in a dark pool. So what does that tell us? That 73% of the stock, they had to go out to the public exchanges. They couldn't find it on the enough liquidity on the private exchanges. They had to access the public exchanges, and 36% of it was we found to be institutional size trades. And we could contrast that here with a sell, right? So 104, you could see that between 103 and 104, we could see that the VWAP price dropped by 20 cents. and that was on a big volume burst as well. 5.2 standard deviations, 316,000 shares, right? And same, same stuff goes here. So I think if you click on it, it gives you a breakdown of what's going on. I think these are all clickable. Okay. So you could see how many trade in the dark pool and stuff like that. So again, that's another way we could start looking at the data, trying to interpret what is going on intraday with the trading activity, right? And that just gives us more insights, more knowledge. It gives us a clear picture of the trading landscape. Okay. So we're right up at 9:30. Well, if there are no questions, I'm just gonna leave it right there.
Awesome job, D. That was great.
Okay.
Chameleons are saying this is a great new tool, and they'll look at it and give you some feedback. So that's awesome.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Stay safe out there. Have a great trading day, and hope to see you guys tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Great job, Dima, as always. We'll